use a microphone, maybe.
Just two questions about the economical risk for Marseille and Manchester. What about the risk of competition? For Marseille, there was a big competition for the airborne with Barcelona, and for Manchester with Liverpool or Dublin. And what about the risk of internal relation with towns or neighbor towns? For Marseille, it's for example for Avignon, Aix-en-Provence, Gap, or Lyon, and for Manchester with internal England towns. And what is the situation, economical situation of this competition?
Well, with Manchester, the interesting point has perhaps to do with subsidiarity. Manchester, in the British context, where we have no subsidiarity, we have no intermediate authorities, we have no département, we have no regions, we simply have unitary authorities and the national state. So cities compete for everything. And sometimes it is very irrational when two neighboring cities are competing for an investment which is on a regional scale. So this is a very famous problem that Manchester and Liverpool would be, both of them, bidding for a project which would benefit both of them and is really of a regional scale. So this is why, back in the 1980s, an official of the European Commission, whose name I forget, he came to England and he said to the two cities, stop competing, this is ridiculous. You need a regional strategy. You need an intermediate level which can think strategically about the benefits that investment of a certain scale can bring, because these projects are regional in scale, they are not local. So this is a very good argument for multi-level governments, multi-scalar governance, and for application of the concept of subsidiarity. It's an indirect answer to your question, but I would say that in the English case, most of the irrational competition between cities can be explained in terms of an absence of regional scale polity, regional scale institutions, regional scale aménagement du territoire. So that's a peculiarly British answer. I think the answer for Marseille will be rather different.
I don't know. I think the first thing to say about economic competition and the interurban competition is for most of them, and there is Esling worked on in a paper about that, about the ranking, the urban ranking, and for a lot of them, it's purely invention of the city, all the cities themselves to promote their model or to compare their advantages. So I think this is the first things to say about economic risk or economic competition. And the second, for your specific question about the risk and the harbor situations and Marseille and Barcelona, is Marseille has played a new card for the harbor as the card of the cruise. So the touristic cards. This is quite similar that I said before about the shift between project logic to event, and there it's not event, but the tourism dimension of the internationalization of the city. So all the assets or all the resources are put on to develop this sector with a lot of material transformations of the inner city, because the touristic and the cruise industry as requirement. And so it's on progress, so it's difficult to observe, but this is something very huge happening now in Marseille. And for the Interland, for the economic competitions or cooperations, the issue there is, like I mentioned very briefly, the Metropolis building, so the cooperation with Aix-en-Provence. So it was very interesting to see how they try, and the they is important to identify who, to try to develop an international strategy for the future metropolis. And the they was not the elected officials in Marseille and Aix-en-Provence, but it was experts appointed by the state to write a strategy in different sectors and in an international strategy as well. But the elected officials in Marseille and Aix-en-Provence have always refused to be part of this process of negotiation, of the definition of what can be a strategy and an international strategy. So for now, it's about institutional bargaining between elected from both sides, Marseille and Aix-en-Provence, because there is no left and right there. There is Marseille against Aix-en-Provence. So there is a huge competition to define what is the sectors to cooperate, what are the fields to work on it, what is the strategic definitions of intervention, of the sphere of influence, etc. So it's still being not even discussed, but on the table.
Florence Rudolph, professor à Strasbourg. Because I went a little bit late, I just catch a part of your talk from Manchester and Michael, and I was when you talk about the two dimensions, so I was imagining, because I didn't hear the beginning, I was imagining symbolic dimension and a more, let's say, objective dimension. And then I thought, okay, it's horizontal and cooperative and alone and vertical and dimension. And it was very interesting because then became the story or the communication of Nicolas, and then it puts again on the agenda these two dimensions. So I thought maybe it's very interesting to cross these two dimensions, which apparently also appear in the discussion, because indeed we can observe that the challenge of the narrative is to put together this vertical and horizontal dimension with this probably sometimes or often come into tension together. And it remember me the different figures of l'économie des grandeurs, when you have different composition of like this special hybrid of figure. How do you, on a certain phase, start to talk about solo or start to talk about together and to work on Mediterranean narrative, and then probably take another narrative. So it was just an idea, an impulse I want to share with you. Not very question, just a kind of, yes, kind of question putting in the scene. Thank you.
So before you have a chance to answer, we'll take another few questions, because otherwise we'll run out of time. So Christian, Ivan, anything? Yeah.
Okay. I think what is striking from the very beginning of this seminar is that when we talk about international strategies of cities, we only talk about public players, politicians. And now we are, I think, thanks to Michael, we're talking about competitiveness, competition, boosterism. And I don't know if it's true that, I don't remember someone who said, cities do not compete, firms do. So my question is, what about the role of economic players, in all these international strategies? Do they support them? And of course, do they have an influence? If you take the example of Marseille, they decided to be in, they had a program called Top 20, and this was definitely led by the Chamber of Commerce, not at all by politicians and local authorities. So it's a good example of that. So my question remains, I mean, what is the role or the place of economic players, institutionalized or not, business association or firms, in these strategies?
I have a very short question to the British cities and probably Manchester. You had a unique opportunity to get the best workforce from Eastern Europe. I mean, thousands of the young, educated Polish people, Hungarians, etc., went to your cities, working, speaking English, etc. Seemingly, you could not make very good international strategies out of that because your country rejected Europe. So was there any chance, for example, for Manchester to set up links with Polish cities from where these people came? Or did not even this idea emerged in your city?
Yeah, anything.
I have a very factual question for Michael that is, in fact, I think related to the thesis of your presentation and to the question Christian just pointed out. So who is behind the Meeping strategy in Manchester? Is it business leaders? Is it the city itself and its economic development department? Is it, maybe, I have no idea, the MDDA, Manchester Digital Development Agency? I'm asking that for two reasons. Because if it's one of the two last ones, then does it mean that political leaders pretend to be the voice of business economic leaders? And if it's notably the last one, would it have a link with Eurocities? Because, well, I'm going to speak about Manchester this afternoon too, so it's a way to draw a link. And more broadly speaking, I really like the idea of these two dimensions. On the one hand, collective willing at developing collective action, and on the other, willing at well, developing, improving individual boosterism. Now, could you tell us when, for which reasons, cities tend towards one dimension at some periods, or at others to the other dimension? Or to push it even more, do you think that in fact the collective action is just a discourse and the other one the true agenda?
And maybe, so one last question before, no, too late. Yes.
I'm working for the network of United Cities of France. I'm in charge of attractiveness. I have a question because I'm also a student in the chair of new marketing le nouveau marketing territorial de la chaire de Aix-en-Provence. And I'm working on the link between attractiveness and more or less international cooperation of cities. And I have a question about this graphic and the reason why the decentralized cooperation is put on the left and down, and why so away from what it's a call to discuss the role of local cooperation on the field, on the city, because there is we think that cooperation is not really involved in the local life, but I try to make the demonstration that they have more involvement in the local development that we think.
Okay, so now you have each a few minutes to champion your own cities, because you've been asked questions nearly as city promoters, some of them.
Yes, I'm not sure to can answer to everything. Maybe this is the last question. Yes, why decentralized cooperations is at the bottom. It's maybe historical reasons, because decentralized cooperations are the first international public policies in the story. So I start with humanitarian operations. Now the cities, they are reluctant to say that they led humanitarian operations. They said, we don't do humanitarian or solidarity, we do business cooperation. So we do cooperations in both ways. So the double payoff for the partners and for us. But still, I think it's still much more about symbolic, or put the power at stage and show and express the legitimacy of the powers and than the economic retribution. So I would like to discuss maybe we talked about earlier the paper of Gilles Pinson and Vincent Bayal about the shift between input legitimacy, like for political means, and output legitimacy for public policies and for economical resources. And I think decentralized cooperation is much more still in input legitimacy, and I can't develop, but the link with the local associations to gain support, to gain electoral support, some of them in community, for instance. But we can discuss a long time about this, because of course the evolutions of the decentralized cooperation is much more linked to economic retribution resources. So there is a move in this pattern. And for the top 20, the Chamber of Commerce, and yes, the cities do not compete, but firms do. Yes, the challenge here is to identify the link between political institutions and economic actors in the way of producing, how they produce public policies, and who lead the game. And this is a whole question, and I'm not sure we have time, but in the next seminar, the link between international firms and the city, maybe they will can talk about who lead the game.
Okay, to finish, let me start with the impossible question which Aileen asked me. What determines the external strategy of cities? What makes cities move in one direction rather than another? Of course, it's an unanswerable question. It is entirely conjunctural. It depends on the political balance of the cities. It depends on the institutional tradition of the cities. It depends upon the economic situation that the city finds itself in. And it depends on personalities. Personalities play an enormously important part. If Mayor Herriot had been a different man, then the history of Lyon would have been a different place. I think I can illustrate this very well from the other part of your question, which is about the case of Manchester. Now, Manchester is an interesting case because you have a situation of a city within a metropolitan area of, say, 2 million people, but a city of 600,000, a city which is the inner core of the metropolis, which is poor, has high unemployment, deindustrialization, and so has a permanent majority of the Labour Party. So a city which from year to year, from decade to decade, stays under the same political control. So therefore there is political stability. There is no threat of political alternation. And this Labour Party had an internal revolution in which the hard left was thrown out and replaced by a pro-business, new Labour administration. And this has retained power in the city with the same personalities for a period of some 30 years. So in answer to your question and to Ivan's, the business interest of Manchester, the links with the Chamber of Commerce, have been internalised as a central plank of public policy. And so therefore, in all the external activities of Manchester, this poor city, this mere fragment of a larger metropolitan area, the only way it can exercise leadership, the only way it can project internationally is through collaboration. So all of its external actions are collaborative with property interests, with chambers of commerce, with local industrialists. It's a very interesting example. And if we take the cost of MIPIM, so the cost of entry to MIPIM, I think, for an individual ticket is €3,000, something like that. It's not cheap. It's very, very expensive. And to have a yacht in MIPIM, in Cannes Harbour, to have a champagne reception, to have a table which is there year after year. Now, Manchester has done all these things, and it can only do it because the business group are collaborating. And in fact, the British at MIPIM have the biggest presence, and in every single case, the cities collaborate with businesses. And they're very eccentric, so personalities play an important part. So one of the property developers who is going to MIPIM is a very keen cyclist. So he started cycling. Roger Maiden, who runs the property group Argent, who developed King's Cross. So I think you all know this project. It's a very big, successful example. He's passionate about cycling, so he goes to Cannes on a cycle. He cycles, and now a complete peloton of businessmen, property developers, architects, surveyors, city leaders, planners, cycles from all over Britain. And this year there's something like 200 of them in a peloton cycling to represent British cities at Cannes Property Fair in MIPIM in March. It's curious, but it rather nicely illustrates the unexpected combination of factors which produce the city's projection in the international stage.
Thank you very much. It was a good discussion. It's now time for lunch break, and then we can continue the discussion after, during the break. Not too much. We don't have to be too serious during the break, but then in the afternoon sessions as well. Just one real-time information. The next seminar that has been evoked several times in the morning will most probably take place on Friday, the 3rd of February. So if you're interested in the theme of this seminar, then you're invited to write the note, to note the date on your agendas, and it will be confirmed soon, but it should be on the Friday the 3rd of February, 2017. Thank you. So I assume lunch is next door. Yes. It is. And we'll start again at 2 o'clock sharp. Thanks very much to our speakers and participants.
Quel sera le thème du
What's the menu?
Quel sera le thème du prochain séminaire?
It's provisionally entitled The Neoliberal City, and it's a discussion on urban economies and the international dimension of it, and also a discussion, more theoretical discussion on how much of this is explained by this neoliberal or anti-neoliberal theoretical framework that is predominant in urban studies. Thank you.